distinguished delegates, excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends. Thank you, first, Mr. President, Ambassador, for your leadership of the Human Rights Council, and on behalf of the International Organization for Migration, for the invitation to join my distinguished UN colleagues here today to discuss this important issue. And I'm particularly grateful to be here today because of the often forgotten, or perhaps willfully ignored, connection between climate change, food insecurity, health insecurity, and human mobility. But if we pause just for a moment to consider the consequences of any of these factors, we quickly see the connection. When people are hungry and they cannot find food, they move. When people's homes are destroyed because of a flood or because of a storm, they move. When people have no hope of feeding their families because the seas have been overfished, or because the land has dried up and they can no longer grow their crops, they move. But unfortunately, the movement of people, the protection of the rights of people who are on the move because of climate, because of health insecurity or food insecurity, are not recognized or accepted under any widely accepted international treaty or convention. Unlike the sacrosanct protections that we have codified in the Refugee Convention, which recognizes the right of people to move, to seek protection based on persecution or conflict, this growing number of people who are literally choosing between feeding their children or moving is not recognized, except in our shared commitment to the protection of their human rights. And distinguished delegates, the fact that we do not have the protections in place will become increasingly concerning and challenging in the years to come. Around the world, as many as 300 million people are living in communities that are vulnerable to climate change. And we know that while conflict continues to drive much of global displacement, the number of new displacements as a result of flood or storms or wildfires or other climate-related disasters now exceeds that of conflict or violence. We know that the climate crisis is hitting the world in less dramatic ways as well. Pastoralists who are leaving the northern Sahel earlier in the season as the rainfall patterns change. When soil is slowly drying up and the crops are no longer yielding, millions of people are embarking on journeys to find jobs, to find food. And no region of the world is immune. But we do know that about 80% of internally displaced people are in countries that are highly vulnerable to climate change. If we consider the impact just on the small island developing states, over the past 2 decades, 20 major disasters have struck the SIDS each year, causing death, causing food insecurity, causing health insecurity, displacement, and profound damage. In the Caribbean region alone, the damage caused by climate and environmental-related disasters is estimated to be a staggering $12.6 billion a year. And we know that when people are moving out of desperation, when people are moving because they have very little choice, they're often moving in the most vulnerable of circumstances, and the impact can be devastating. Every year, we hear thousands of reports of people who are trafficked, who find themselves in a situation where they are not making choices about the work they do or the situation in which they live. We hear report after report of people who are kidnapped while they're migrating. We hear testimony after testimony of people who have suffered rape or other sexual abuse while they're on the move. And we know that we cannot continue to exist in a world that fundamentally ignores the impact of climate change, food insecurity, and health insecurity on people. Because humans are a mobile species. And the first step that many humans will take when they're faced with such challenges is to move. So we are here to join voices with our partners in the UN community to call on all of you to do three things. Number one, to proactively work with communities to build resilience in the face of climate impact. We know that data now exists that will enable us to predict which communities will face the harshest consequences of drought, of flooding, of storms. So we have no need to wait until millions of people have been displaced and face the most desperate of circumstances before we act. Number two, we must emphasize the human rights of those who are already on the move. We're hearing far too many examples of desperate people who are pushed back from borders, people who are drowning in the seas or expiring in the desert because they are not able to seek protections along the way. It may be true that these people will not have access under the Refugee Convention, but it does not mean that we are at license to turn our back on human beings. Finally, we must build realistic pathways for people to move safely and for people to move with dignity. This means engaging in innovative concepts like those we've seen between Tuvalu and the government of Australia, where it recognizes that a country that is facing the existential threat of disappearing by rising seawaters can now face a legal, safe, dignified pathway to find work in another country. That kind of idea needs to be part of our adaptation strategies at the national level as well as at the international level. It also means working closely with local communities so that we do not lose what it is to make up that community. We do not lose the rich culture and heritage of communities that could otherwise be lost as a result of climate change. And we need to design forward-looking responses, acknowledging that climate change, the food and water crisis will lead more people to move. This is not speculation. This is what is going to happen. So if we're going to be successful, if we're going to ensure that people are not moving in situations of desperation, that people are not subject to wage exploitation, to abuse, to violence, to death, we must work together to identify and address the needs of this displaced or soon to be displaced population around the world. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen and friends, let us work together to create a future where migration is, wherever possible, a choice, and where health and food security are a reality for all. Thank you very much.